Please click to subscribe. I really appreciate all the support. It's now been 107 days since Nancy Guthrie went missing. I'm in the airport right now, by the way, walking in my flight on my way to my next story, which I'll keep you guys posted on. But this episode is going to focus on Nancy Guthrie and specifically what happened in the initial hours after she went missing. You know, there's been a lot of confusion. Those first couple of hours, remember, Sergeant Aaron Cross with Pima County had told me that the family did, in fact, believe that she walked off, but then he clarified and said that was not the case. What went down? When was it officially turned into a crime scene? How do you handle that as a police officer when family's there and family's showing up and you've got, emotions running high, but you're trying to figure out what's going on? I want to dive into those first couple of hours, and I'm going to do that with my buddy, retired FBI agent Steve Moore.
The first thing I wanted to get is your reaction to there's this new video of Sheriff Nanos. Fox Digital got video of him leaving the sheriff's office, and they asked him about the Nancy Guthrie investigation. It's always kind of awkward when you approach someone like that. He obviously wasn't really expecting it, but he said we're getting closer. I'm curious what you took from that. If you just thought he was just sort of being optimistic, or if you think that may actually mean something.
I think he didn't feel like saying same old, different day. We're just not. I think what that means is we're getting closer because we haven't given up. And technically, every day you consider. I mean, if you can eliminate one person in Arizona that day, or one person in the United States, technically you've gotten closer. But I would need something more than that for that to mean anything significant to me.
Yeah. And a few weeks ago, the New York Post, and I don't want to get like personal here, but I did notice his Corvette. A few weeks ago, the New York Post had pictures of him in the Corvette, and then he was parked right in front of the sheriff's office. He left again in the Corvette in that video. I don't know. I mean, look, he can have a Corvette. I mean, the guy's been working his whole, in law enforcement his whole life and whatever. But I don't know, like just with everything going on with Nancy Guthrie, for some people it kind of rubs them the wrong way that I guess that he drives that car to work, or it just seems to be getting a lot of attention.
Yeah. It's one of these things where if you succeed in all your cases and you look like Sherlock Holmes, the Corvette becomes, ooh, isn't he cool? It's kind
You're
of like
right.
the James Bond drove an Aston Martin DB, what was it, DB5, and nobody said anything about it because James Bond always succeeded. If James Bond didn't succeed, they'd say, "How do you get that car?" So I think there's a little bit of self-inflicted wounds there when you are not succeeding in something. I wouldn't show up with bravado at work. I would show up like a blue collar worker trying to get out. I've got a couple of cars, one of which I think is fancy, and one of them I think is not. It's an old pickup. I might drive the old pickup if the press was there.
Yeah, you make such a good point because I've thought about that a lot, not just with the Corvette, but just in general. Um, Whether it's fair or not fair, the fact that the case isn't solved, and it might not be Nanos's fault at all. I mean, we don't know. It could have been a whole different sheriff and they might be in the same spot, but like it doesn't really matter because no matter what, the fact that the case is not solved and there hasn't been any progress, people are not going to be happy. Like it's almost like I think about it as a reporter, if my boss says, go get this interview and I can't get the interview and the person doesn't want to talk and it's impossible to get it. It still doesn't really matter. I didn't get it. Like it still doesn't
Right.
look good, and
Yeah.
it could be
Yeah.
totally out of my control, but the optics don't change. And I think that's kind of maybe the situation here. And it's like in some ways, he doesn't realize that.
Yeah, he may not. And that's and there's part of me, as you said before, that says, hey, this is my car. I've worked for it. I'm going to drive it in good times and in bad times. but here, you do need to be aware. Like if you had just screwed up something at work and you came into the meeting with the boss, you wouldn't be the one sitting there with a cup of coffee, talking, say, hey, how are you? Hey, hey,
Right,
hey,
right.
this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
You'd be the one sitting quietly at your desk because there is something about the um, human psyche that says, when I am not doing well, I should back it down a little bit, pump the brakes, be a little bit humble, and show that I'm trying. And he may not get that. And, like you said, it may not have anything to do with him. It may not. But whether or not he's Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, or the sheriff of Pima County having a bad case, there comes a time when you say, I'm just going to be a little bit quieter and I'm going to be a little bit more humble and encourage you all to understand that I'm working very hard. And maybe that's what he's missing.
To basically boot him out of office. There's a couple of different avenues where that in ways that that's happening. There's a recall, but there's also the board of commissioners there that are coming up with different ways, and there's different ones that really want to push it forward. If in fact he was removed, what does that do for the investigation? And I don't know if you've worked on any cases in the past where like your supervisor or boss has been fired or been, I mean, is it actually a bad thing at this point for when it comes to the Nancy Guthrie investigation, or would it be a good thing?
Um, I've had those situations where somebody above me has been moved out, or is in Pima County terms rotated, um, and for cause because a case wasn't going well, or headquarters felt like we didn't have things lined up the way they wanted it to be lined up. And it depends. If the person is the real cause of the problem, I mean, half the time you're saying, oh, great. Now we can get to work. Now he's not going to bother us. He or she is not going to bother us. We're not going to have to go off on these little tangents when we know the direction we need to go. But some of the time it's, oh, no, not this one. They were really making this investigation work. And now we're going to have to kind of like really gather up whatever they were doing and try to take up for them.
Right. So yeah, even on the outside though, some people want him gone. It may, I don't know, maybe it further complicates things. Maybe they already have a process in place. I don't know.
It will complicate things. I mean, there is going to be, say he was removed from the case and say he was the problem. I'm not alleging that necessarily, but say those were true. There's going to be, even in that situation, a confusion over now, who do I ask on this decision? There are certain things you can't do without a manager's approval. And so you're thinking to yourself, who's the next in line? Who do I go to for that? They're not for, and so instead of walking into the sheriff's office and say, remember that lead we had out in Marana or wherever it is, mind if I just go take on that lead? And instead of a decision right away, the person is going to have to say, I'm new. Sit down, tell me about the lead in Marana. So there is going to be, even in the best of situations, a learning curve that's going to stunt the growth of the investigation for a little while. But I would, if the sheriff had been removed and he was the problem, I would say that would be a very short time of stumbling and a vast improvement on accelerating the case going forward.
I talked to a sergeant from the Pima County Sheriff's Office in the last week. His name's Aaron Cross, and he was describing sort of how chaotic it was the first week right after Nancy went missing, that there was a communication breakdown within the department that also, bled into communication with the FBI. But I wanted to add, and he was describing to me how some of the detectives were telling him about the chaos right when they first got to the house, and that he was saying that some family members thought maybe she had walked off. Like there was all sorts of information coming in. The family was there. I wanted to ask you about that. Like when you first arrive on a scene, And there may have been a crime, there may not have been a crime, but families there. Obviously, emotions are high. It could be a crime scene, but it might not be a crime scene. How do you handle that? Because obviously they're going to be wanting to search around the house, the family, and looking and emotional, but at the same time, I'd imagine you have to sort of preserve the scene too.
Yeah, you're not allowed to have confusion at a crime scene like that. And let me unpack that, because
Yeah.
obviously there's going to be all sorts of things going on and people will be confused. But law enforcement coming in, you are the ones who've done this all the time. You shouldn't be acting like this is your first time at a crime scene or first time somebody's been missing. And it certainly wasn't with these people. The uniformed officers see it every day. I'm wondering what is their training? The FBI and well-run police departments and sheriff's departments, we have an absolute plan. It's like running a play. You do this, you do this, you do this. You start with them. Talk to that person. You separate those groups right there. You start interviewing them. Let's find out what we have, what information. I'm going over to this room. Don't let anybody bother me. All I want to hear is input from you guys. You know what I'm saying? You are the ones who come in and deal with the confusion. It's like, imagine if you cut yourself really badly, you're bleeding, and you make it into an emergency room, and the emergency room nurse goes, "Oh my gosh, you're bleeding." That's not what happens. They say, "Sit down, calm down. Doctors here. You just sit there, let us do our job, and somebody get some compression on that. This kind of thing." An emergency room does it every day. They may move fast. They may be very concerned if a person comes in very bad condition, but one thing they're not is confused. And so that being confused is not a sign of this is a really big crime. So we're confused. That's a sign of inadequate preparation.
How do you deal with family members though? And not specifically in this case, but just sort of generally, people are really emotional when you arrive on a scene when someone's missing, and
Yes.
realizing that, your mom is gone. And they are probably telling you things like, "Oh, this may have happened," or that, and I don't know what happened at Nancy Guthrie's house. I'm just thinking if it was me, maybe I'm looking in the different bed. You're kind of rushing around, I'm sure. Like, how do you deal with the family?
Well, first of all, you need to get them in a position, in an emotional position where they can provide lucid information. Get something. It's like why you always hear on 911. Okay, take a breath, calm down, just tell me, this kind of thing. It's similar to that, except it's easier. If you unless it's just one of you, but if you can get 3 or 4 people in the room very quickly, as I was saying before, you get them, you get them away from the people who are running the case immediately. Get somebody who is very good with people to sit them down, get them some water, say, give them confidence. We've got this. This is what we do. We're here to help you. Now, please, quietly and as carefully as you can, and write down things if you need to, but I am here to listen to every word you say, and I'll be here for the next 10 minutes with you, not moving a muscle, hearing every word. And if you don't tell me calmly, it slows the investigation down, doesn't speed it up to talk fast. And so while you're doing that, the person who's going to be in charge of the investigation is in another side of the room, not in a conversation with frantic family. They're able to think about this, saying, "What do we have?" And they'll get information from investigators. We have blood on the porch. Okay, we've got a crime scene. Then have somebody set up a perimeter. Somebody get investigation or evidence response out here on the way now. We need to start interviewing people around the neighborhood. You're in charge of that. You go do that. So as you can see, the fewer people you have, the more confusion there's going to be. The more people you have can be confusion if the person in charge doesn't have a plan for getting everything strategized, you can't. It's like you have to huddle before you run a play, and so it sounds to me like nobody took charge. If there's confusion, it means that nobody's in charge who knows what they're doing. Because if you have that person, they know how to compartmentalize everything. It's like building a brick wall. You get all these things done, and then it works. Otherwise, it's just chaos.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like in Nancy's situation at her house, you've got the driveway, you've got possible tire prints, you've got the blood, you've got all the possible evidence in the house. When you show up to a scene like that as a deputy or an agent, um, you're dealing with the family, you're dealing with the immediate emotion, like you just said. But do you need to be thinking about it being a crime scene too? Because at the same, if everybody's running around, you're kind of like hurting the evidence, aren't you?
Yes, you are, but you don't know where. You can't just say, okay, we can't talk in here. Because, I mean, ideally, you're already there. The family's already there, so they've already contaminated the thing. So what you'd like to do is move everything away, but at night, in the middle of the night, it might not be a useful thing to do. Especially, I mean, you would think, well, maybe we can move to the driveway, but as soon as they say we've got blood on the front porch, well, then the outside's bad too. So you would try to constrain everything into, say, a living room or something like that. If there was obvious signs of a struggle there, you might have to go someplace else. But initially, you go to the kind of like the one place that is closest to being a neutral site, something that isn't going to screw up the investigation. I remember one time I responded to a shooting, and I was FBI, so I wasn't the first person there. It's going to be uniformed LAPD, and I screamed up, code 3, bailed out of the car. I saw a SWAT team going in. There was blood on the floor. Kids were running by, panicked, and I got to the location, and there was a uniformed officer there with a clipboard saying name, agency, and contact phone number. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they understand how to run a crime scene. And it's kind of like, in a ship in battle, people still have to get to their positions and man their guns. They can't just huddle.
So even like regular first responding deputies should know that from the moment they get there, you would
That's
say?
part of people say, what do people do in the shooting in the police academy? Well, it's more than just shooting. You learn stuff like that. Crime scene management is one of the subjects you will be tested on. It's not like, you see the crime scene and they pick up a casing with a pencil, lead and stuff. Stuff like that. First of all, don't do that. But things like that, don't touch the evidence. Things like that. That's what they teach at the police academy.
There's been some false alarms with finding human remains. People thought maybe they were Nancy's. There was like a femur that was found a couple of days ago, and from the local deputies we've talked to there, they said, look, if you start searching the desert here, some of the retired guys have told me this, like you're going to find human remains. I mean, it's a vast desert. There's a lot of migrants that come through that area that don't make. I mean, it's like they're gonna find. There's a lot of missing people, so it doesn't really surprise me that they've found some things. But I'm just wondering if they do find, and you hope that maybe she's still alive, but just talking realistically, if they do find Nancy's body somewhere, how big of a deal is that for the investigation? I mean, does that open up a whole new,
It's
um,
massive.
yeah, explain that. I mean, like even with time passing by.
If they found, I would really rather they found her alive.
Yeah.
But if they found her body, um, it would it would be another treasure trove of evidence. And maybe this time, the FBI and the sheriff's department could all be on the same page, set up a wide perimeter because the body had to get there somehow. So there will be evidence on the ground, whether it's footprints, tire tracks. You hope they're detectable, but it will, where the body is dumped, that will give you intel. Things that are on the body, even at whatever state of decay we've got there, you're still going to have useful evidence, and that would be just a treasure trove of information.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even the location alone, something
Oh,
as
yeah.
simple as that, right? Then you start looking for surveillance video. I mean, it gives you an idea of what direction the person was going in.
Right. Somebody's not going to drive 100 miles one direction to dump a body and then come back. It just, they just don't do that. And somebody will point out, on the internet, well, I know when they did that.
Yeah.
But generally they don't do that. And that will help you. And, things like if it's in a really remote area that's rugged, well, probably had a 4x4, there's all sorts of information that you can pick up.
This is not just the story of a disappearance. This is the story of what happened in the hours immediately after Nancy Guthrie went missing. Hours that law enforcement experts say are the most critical in any case involving a potential abduction. Hours that, according to documented accounts from the very sergeant who worked the case, were consumed by confusion, miscommunication, and a chaotic response that may have compromised the best evidence investigators ever had. 107 days. That is how long Nancy Guthrie has been missing. And the deeper you look into the first hours of this investigation, the more troubling the picture becomes. If this is your first time hearing Nancy's name, stay with this, because what happened in Pima County, Arizona, raises questions that matter far beyond one missing woman. Questions about how law enforcement responds when someone vanishes, how jurisdictional pride can override common sense, and how institutional failures can turn a solvable case into a cold one. And if you have been following this story, you already know that the disappearance itself is only half the story. Before going any further, if you want the complete, detailed coverage of cases like this one, with expert analysis and documented facts, this is exactly what Samuel Vale Crime Chronicles is built for. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Every like on this video tells the algorithm that Nancy Guthrie's story deserves to be heard by more people. Now let's get into it. Nancy Guthrie lived on the outskirts of Pima County, Arizona, a part of the American Southwest, where the landscape itself feels like a warning. The Sonoran Desert stretches across southern Arizona in every direction, vast and indifferent. A place where temperatures routinely exceed 100 degrees, and where the distance between one property and the next can be measured in miles rather than feet. It is a place where people can disappear, and where finding them again is never simple. Nancy was a real person with a real life. A woman who had family who cared for her, who knew her routine, and who noticed immediately when something was wrong. The details of her personal history, her relationships, and the specifics of her daily life form the human foundation of a story that has since been overwhelmed by procedural failures and political battles. But she is the reason any of this matters. She is the reason investigators were called. She is the reason her family showed up that night. And she is the reason that what happened in the first hours of the response cannot be minimized, excused, or forgotten. When the alarm was raised that Nancy was missing, first responders arrived at her home to find a scene that was immediately ambiguous. There was blood on the front porch. There were potential tire prints in the driveway. Her family was already present, emotional, frightened, moving through the property. The situation demanded immediate, decisive, practiced action. What it received, according to documented accounts from within the Pima County Sheriff's Office itself, was something far less organized. Sergeant Aaron Cross of the Pima County Sheriff's Office later confirmed to journalists covering the case that the first week after Nancy disappeared was marked by a communication breakdown within the department. That breakdown bled outward, affecting the relationship between the sheriff's office and the FBI. Detectives who were present in those first hours described the scene as chaotic. And in the middle of that chaos, there was genuine confusion about something that should have been answered within minutes of arrival. Was this a crime scene or a missing person case? That distinction is not a matter of semantics. It is the difference between securing every inch of the property as potential evidence or allowing family members to move freely through a space where the truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie may have been written in blood and fiber and fingerprints and footprints. It is the difference between preserving a trail and watching it disappear. According to Sergeant Cross, some family members in those initial moments believed that Nancy may have walked away from the home on her own. Cross himself would later clarify that this was not the official position, that law enforcement did not, in fact, believe she had simply walked off. But the fact that this confusion existed in the first place, and that it was communicated in contradictory ways both internally and externally, is a window into how disorganized those initial hours were. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore, who has spent decades working kidnapping and violent crime cases, is direct about what should happen when law enforcement arrives at a scene like the one at Nancy Guthrie's home. He describes it as running a play, a practiced, structured sequence of actions that trained officers should execute without hesitation regardless of the emotional environment they walk into. The first priority is separating the family from the operational area of the investigation. Not because their information doesn't matter, it absolutely does, but because an investigator cannot simultaneously manage the grief and fear of a missing woman's family and assess a potential crime scene with the clarity that the moment demands. Someone skilled in witness management sits with the family, offers calm and confidence, and extracts information systematically. Meanwhile, the lead investigator remains separate, receiving only processed information from subordinates, thinking clearly about what the evidence is saying and what resources need to be called. The moment blood is confirmed on the front porch, a perimeter gets established, evidence response gets called, every person entering and exiting the scene is logged. Every surface that could hold a fingerprint, a hair, a fiber, a skin cell is treated as irreplaceable. Because it is. Moore compares a well-run crime scene response to an emergency room. When a patient arrives bleeding and panicked, the emergency room does not become chaotic. It moves fast, it is urgent, but it is never confused. The nurses and doctors know exactly what they are doing, because they have done it countless times, and they have a plan. Law enforcement arriving at a potential abduction scene should operate the same way, not because the situation isn't serious, but because seriousness demands competence, not chaos. The confusion documented at Nancy Guthrie's home, Moore argues, is not a sign that the case was uniquely complicated. It is a sign that someone failed to take command of the scene in the way that training demands. When nobody is truly in charge, when the person who should be directing the response is instead caught up in the emotional noise of the moment, the result is exactly what was described by the detectives who were there: chaos. And chaos has consequences. By the time the scene was formally treated as a crime scene, family members and first responders had already moved through critical areas. The driveway with its potential tire prints, the front porch where blood had been found, the interior of the home where physical evidence may have been present on every surface that Nancy or another person had touched. Every step taken through that space without a preservation protocol in place was a step that made the investigation harder. The scene was initially processed by local Pima County crime scene investigators. It was then opened back up, then closed again, and it was not until day 5 full days after Nancy Guthrie went missing, that the FBI's Evidence Response Unit arrived and processed the scene. 5 days. In the context of a potential abduction, 5 days is an eternity. Evidence degrades. Environmental conditions, in the Sonoran Desert, those conditions are extreme, accelerate that degradation. Physical traces that might have survived the first night begin to break down under the sun. What was recoverable on day 1 may be partially or entirely unrecoverable by day 5. Moore's assessment of this delay is measured but unambiguous. He uses the image of arriving late to a buffet. Some things are going to be gone. The pieces that remain may not make sense without the pieces that have disappeared. And what the FBI Evidence Response Unit walked into on day 5 was not the scene that existed when Nancy Guthrie vanished. It was a version of that scene, altered by time, by contamination, and by the decisions made in those first critical hours. The FBI's capabilities in evidence processing are, by virtually every credible account, among the most advanced available to American law enforcement. The Bureau operates specialized evidence response teams that can be transported by air, deployed rapidly, and equipped with resources that most county-level agencies simply do not have access to. not due to any failure of skill or desire, but due to the realities of budget and manpower. The FBI has been described by former agents as capable of flying an entire evidence collection operation directly to a scene, setting up what amounts to a fully functional forensic office in the field. That capability was available to the Pima County investigation from nearly the beginning, and yet it was not used. FBI Director Kash Patel addressed this publicly in an appearance on Fox News, stating that the FBI was kept out of the investigation for the first 4 days. He revealed that the Bureau had a plane standing by, ready to transport DNA evidence directly to the forensic laboratory at Quantico in Virginia, the FBI's flagship research and analysis facility, capable of processing complex biological evidence with resources and precision that no private laboratory can match. The sheriff's office, according to Patel's public statements, chose instead to send the evidence to a private lab. Patel stopped short of making a direct personal attack on Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos. When pressed on the matter, he suggested that the American people could draw their own conclusions. But his public willingness to address the situation at all, as a sitting FBI director commenting critically on a local law enforcement agency's handling of an active investigation, is itself significant. Former FBI agents familiar with the Bureau's protocols have noted that an FBI director publicly criticizing a local sheriff represents an extraordinary step. The FBI's working relationship with local and county law enforcement agencies across the country depends on mutual respect and cooperation. The Bureau has a long institutional interest in maintaining productive relationships with the thousands of police and sheriff's departments it works alongside. A director who publicly calls out a local sheriff risks damaging not just one relationship, but signaling to agencies nationwide that the FBI will go public with grievances rather than resolving them internally. For that step to be taken publicly, those same former agents suggest, something significant must have occurred at the ground level first. Agents working directly with the sheriff's investigators would have been the first to encounter the friction. They would have communicated that friction upward through the chain of command. And only after internal efforts to resolve the impasse proved insufficient, would the director have made the decision to address it publicly. The decision to send evidence to a private lab rather than Quantico, and the 4-day delay in allowing the FBI access to the investigation, sit at the center of this documented conflict. The motivation behind the sheriff's decision remains publicly unexplained. What is documented is that the conflict existed, that it was significant enough to reach the desk of the FBI director, and that it was public enough to generate news coverage. The only evidence publicly confirmed from the processing of Nancy Guthrie's home is a single strand of hair. That hair did not belong to Nancy. It was collected and submitted for DNA testing. And while DNA testing takes time, and while the public disclosure of forensic results in an active investigation is typically limited for investigative reasons, the existence of that hair as the sole confirmed piece of physical evidence has drawn scrutiny from forensic professionals. A former crime scene investigator consulted on the case put it plainly, if you process an entire scene, and all you come back with is a single hair, your supervisor sends you back in, because one hair does not exist in isolation. Hairs shed in multiples. A person who enters a location, especially one involved in a physical encounter, does not leave a single follicle, and nothing else. Skin cells are transferred through every surface touched. Fingerprints, invisible to the naked eye, exist on every smooth surface a hand makes contact with. Fiber evidence clings to upholstery and carpet. The forensic principle being invoked here is straightforward. Finding one piece of trace evidence does not indicate a clean scene. It indicates that more evidence is there to be found, and if only one piece was recovered, it suggests that the collection process did not go far enough. Moore echoes this directly. Evidence that convicts people is frequently invisible. A fingerprint cannot be seen from more than a foot away. Hair on clothing is not something most people notice. Skin cells transfer through contact and do not simply evaporate. If one hair was found at Nancy Guthrie's home, the probability, based on how biological trace evidence actually behaves, is that more was present and either missed or degraded before collection. Whether additional evidence was collected, but simply not disclosed to the public, is unknown. Active investigations routinely withhold forensic details to protect the integrity of any eventual prosecution, but the public record as it stands identifies only a single hair as confirmed physical evidence from the scene. The broader search for Nancy Guthrie has extended across the surrounding desert, and that search has encountered the uncomfortable reality of the Sonoran Desert itself. It is not a clean landscape. Retired law enforcement officials familiar with the region have noted that searching desert terrain in southern Arizona will, with near certainty, turn up human remains. The area is a corridor for undocumented border crossings. People die attempting to cross. Other missing persons. Cases from the region remain unresolved. Bones and partial remains surface during searches with a frequency that reflects both the harshness of the environment and the number of people who have entered it without documentation and never emerged. In the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, there were multiple reported findings that were initially feared to be her remains. A femur, discovered approximately 105 days into the investigation, drew attention before being confirmed as not belonging to Nancy. Each false alarm carries its own specific cruelty. A surge of dread followed by confirmation that someone else's tragedy has intersected with this one, while Nancy remains unfound. The question of what finding Nancy's remains would mean for the investigation is one that forensic and investigative experts address carefully. The documented answer is that a body, even in an advanced state of decomposition, even months after death, represents a significant evidentiary resource. The location of remains tells investigators about direction of travel, about the likely nature of the vehicle used, about how physically demanding the dump site was to access, and what that implies about the perpetrator. The perimeter surrounding the body becomes a crime scene of its own. Tire tracks, footprints, disturbance patterns, items dropped or discarded, even biological evidence from remains is potentially recoverable months later. Skin cells transferred through contact with another person do not simply vanish. Hair follicles protected by the body's position can survive extended exposure. DNA identification is possible under these conditions, though not guaranteed. The evidentiary value of finding Nancy, however devastating the confirmation of her death would be substantial. Investigators have said as much, both publicly and in conversations with journalists covering the case. The political dimension of this investigation has added a layer of complexity that is unusual even by the standards of high-profile missing persons cases. A formal recall effort targeting Sheriff Chris Nanos has been underway, with additional avenues being explored by the Pima County Board of Supervisors. The criticism directed at Nanos comes from multiple directions: the documented confusion in the initial response, the conflict with the FBI, the decision to use a private lab, and a broader perception that the investigation has stalled without sufficient explanation. Nanos, when approached by journalists outside his office, stated that the investigation was getting closer. The precise meaning of that statement is impossible to assess from the outside. Investigations do progress incrementally. Databases are searched, persons of interest are eliminated, leads are run down. And getting closer may reflect genuine movement that the public cannot see. It may also reflect the instinct of a public official to project forward momentum when the publicly visible picture is one of stagnation. The optics of the situation are, by the assessment of virtually everyone who has commented on the case, unfavorable to the sheriff. When a case is unsolved and the public is watching, the appearance of accountability matters alongside the substance of it. A law enforcement executive who appears unbothered, who presents the same public demeanor in the middle of a high-profile unsolved case as they would under ordinary circumstances, may be projecting confidence, or may be misjudging how their public conduct is being perceived by a community that is frightened and grieving and paying close attention. Whether the difficulties in this investigation trace back primarily to the sheriff's office, to jurisdictional friction, to the specific challenges of the desert environment, or to some combination of all of these factors, is not established by the public record. What is established is that a woman has been missing for more than 100 days, that the FBI and the local sheriff's office have had a documented public conflict over the handling of evidence, that the initial response to the scene was chaotic by the accounts of people who were present, and that the 5-day gap before the FBI processed the crime scene represents a significant departure from best practices in abduction investigations. The possibility of removing the sheriff raises its own documented complexities. Law enforcement leadership changes during an active investigation, regardless of whether the change is warranted, create a disruption in command structure. Decisions that previously required a direct conversation with a known authority figure now require explanation and context for a new one. Leads that were in progress must be rebriefed. Priorities must be re-established. Even in circumstances where a change in leadership is the right call, there is a learning curve that temporarily affects the pace of the investigation. Former investigators who have experienced leadership changes mid-case describe the experience consistently. In the best case, it is a short stumble followed by improvement. In any case, it is a stumble. The FBI's involvement in the case continues. The Bureau has jurisdiction over kidnapping cases that cross or potentially cross state lines. Its forensic resources, the laboratory at Quantico, the evidence response teams, the analytical capabilities, remain available to this investigation. The documented conflict between federal and local investigators has not, based on available reporting, resulted in the FBI withdrawing from the case, but the friction has been real, public, and consequential. 107 days after Nancy Guthrie went missing, the desert keeps its silence. There has been no arrest. There has been no publicly announced identification of a suspect. The hair found at her home is in testing. The investigation continues. But the first hours of that investigation, the hours when the scene was fresh, when evidence was intact, when every minute contained information that the following minutes might erase, those hours are gone. They cannot be reclaimed. The decisions made in those hours, and the decisions not made, are part of the permanent record of this case. Whether they ultimately cost the investigation what it needed most to find Nancy Guthrie is a question that cannot yet be answered. But it is a question that deserves to be asked. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And the standard of response she received in those first critical hours should be scrutinized, not to assign blame for its own sake, but because understanding what went wrong is the first step toward ensuring it does not happen again to the next person who vanishes in a county that wasn't ready. The desert is vast. The silence is heavy. And somewhere out there, the truth is waiting to be found. If this story matters to you, if you believe that Nancy Guthrie's case deserves continued attention, rigorous documentation, and the kind of careful, fact-based analysis that keeps the pressure on, then this is exactly the work that Samuel Vale Crime Chronicles is committed to doing. Subscribe to the channel right now so you are here for every update as this case develops. Leave a like on this video. It costs nothing, and it ensures that more people find Nancy's story who might not have found it otherwise. Every share, every comment, every subscriber is part of keeping this case alive in the public consciousness, and Nancy Guthrie's case cannot afford to be forgotten.